Okay, we'll start now. Yeah. Welcome to ANU Indonesia Project Global Seminar. My name is Arianto Patundru and I'm hosting this program with Nurkemala Mulyani and Gemma Setiadi. We acknowledge the first Australians and pay our respect to elders, past, present, and emerging. We are grateful for the support from the Australian National University and the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Today's webinar is special as we are launching a new series. Since March 2020, we have been running a series on COVID-19 in Indonesia, and now we are launching a new series on gender equality and social inclusion, or JESI. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Angie Bexley and Professor Catherine Robinson, both from ANU, to kick off this new series. Dr. Bexley has recently completed a study investigating the practice of Islamic matchmaking through digital platforms. She examined more than 5,000 conversations from Taaruf websites over 18 months period. The study reveals how digital platforms have contributed to shifting gender relations in Indonesia. She will highlight the key findings of the study, and Professor Robinson will discuss the results. Dr. Angie Bexley is a senior research fellow at the Crawford School of Public Policy, Australian National University. She is the deputy director of the Children's Policy and contributes to the Poverty and Inequality Center. Angie is passionate about social justice and advises on gender equity, diversity, and inclusion for the Indonesia Project and the College of Asia and the Pacific ANU. She has managed, evaluated, and designed social inclusion programs across the social development portfolio of Australian aid programs and has worked for the Asia Foundation, Oxfam, and the Carter Center. Professor Catherine Robinson is an emeritus professor at the School of Culture, History, and Language at ANU. Her research areas include gender, Islam, cross-cultural marriages, and internet-mediated social relationship. Katie was the editor of the Asia Pacific Journal of Anthropology, and she was also the president of Asian Studies Association of Australia. As usual, we will have Q&A session after the talks, but if you want, you can write your question anytime on the Q&A box, not on the chat box. We will attend to them in the Q&A session. Please also kindly fill a little polling when it appears on your screen. We need this to improve our series. So without further ado, let me invite Angie to start her presentation. Over to you, Mbak Angie.
Thanks, Acho. Can I get a thumbs up? Can you see my screen?
Oh, not yet.
No, okay. How about now?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for those who are joining from Indonesia. It's pretty early there. Thank you to Acho for inviting me to present in this new Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Global Seminar series. And thank you, of course, to Kathy, who has kindly agreed to be discussant today. I'm coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri land in Canberra. This is unceded land, and I pay my respects to their elders and to past, present and future generations of their children and young people, and to all First Nations people who are joining us today. So this is a study of Taaruf, the Indonesian practice of matchmaking that leads to marriage. This study actually began in 2019, and over an 18-month period from 2020 to 21, we tracked online Taaruf. This is part of a longer study to try and better understand women's experiences and perspectives with their engagement with the online environment in the context of an increasingly conservative Indonesia. So today I'm going to present some of the findings of this preliminary study, and I welcome your input and your feedback. This project was a collaboration, as most projects are, and I'd like to acknowledge Perkumpulan Bhinneka Kultura Nusantara, who are based in Jakarta, and lead researcher Sado, who is joining us from Jakarta today. And I also want to acknowledge Ford Foundation support for this research, and former project officer Heidi Arbuckle has also joined us here today. So welcome to you both. So my slides today, I have three aims for my presentation. The first is to present to you a case study of Taaruf Online. And I'm going to sort of step you through the process of what it is, what it looks like online, and some of the perspectives from women themselves who have been on some of these platforms. And I'll introduce a novel methodology for understanding these online and offline worlds using primarily a gender relations approach. And I'll present just a few of the key findings, and I'll focus today on the desired traits for male and female spouses. And thirdly, I'll just present a few preliminary conclusions about gender relations, the role of marriage, and what it means for young people at this point in time in Indonesia. So I have a lot to get through today. I'm going to talk through some of the quantitative data and what that means, and then I will finish off with some qualitative work. So I'm just going to jump straight in with the methods. So we used both online and offline and to create a digital ethnography, which meant we tracked trends on social media, we analysed content, and we looked at over 5,000 lines of conversation of text. So that means all of these comments that came out of two Instagram accounts, taarufislami.id and taarufcool.id. The third account was a Taaruf mediator account, and I'll explain what that is in a minute, rumah.taaruf. Ethnographic methods included participant observation in Taaruf trainings and semi-structured interviews with 20 women and men who were participants. They were account administrators and intermediaries. And this was carried out by an Indonesian team of researchers based in Jakarta. The theoretical underpinnings for this approach has been informed by a gender relations approach. Using R.W. Connell's framework for understanding gender orders, this has been a really useful way, as she says, to look at a structural inventory of society. Kathy Robinson's own work, a range of structures analytically distinguished as power relations, production relations, emotional relations, gender symbolism, has been really useful for me to sort of view this in breaking those areas down. As a point of entry, to better understand economic relations and power relations, I've started with Connell's concept of cathexis. This means the emotional realm, the intimate realm, and really I'm interested in, I guess, the social constructedness of things like desire and the sorts of patterns that are established around that to be able to make that happen. This is an approach, cathexis itself is an approach that's often overlooked in favour of more common focuses that tend to look at gender through economic relations and power relations, for example. The other thing I'll just say here is that this study challenges Western feminist views and a certain idea of agency as either resistance or dominance. A gender relations approach has allowed me to sort of break these whole concepts down and really seek to better understand and better articulate nuance and where it occurs. So I was really inspired by Eva Nisa's work, Eva Nisa, Senior Research Fellow who won a teaching award today in College of Asia Pacific, and her work on Taaruf and the foundational work that she has done in this area. So the aim of this study here is to better understand how these Taaruf platforms work, how they operate, and in what ways, and if they do, offer young women pathways to autonomy, and what we can learn about women's agencies as they negotiate these patriarchal platforms. So I'll go on, went ahead to explain. So what is Taaruf? Over the past decade, online Taaruf has become a really popular way for young Muslims to get married in Indonesia without having to date or to court, which is regarded as un-Islamic. It's very popular with young men and women, but it is young women who outnumber men on these sites. To be clear, these sites are not Tinder for Muslims. Taaruf sites have the specific objective of marriage as an end result, while Tinder-related sites may not have this specific objective. The popularity of Taaruf has also been driven by online movements of preachers and young people who proclaim Hijrah, the reformist movement that renounces dating. Hijrah has become a popular movement driven by the desire for self-improvement and to become a better Muslim. So on to Indonesia Tanpa Pacaran, which of course all of you will know. Indonesia without courting or dateship has become a massively popular movement in Indonesia. And it is really young women and young girls that are involved as participants in this movement. A common slogan for ITP is Nikah dulu, pacaran nanti. So you get married first and then you have the dating and the courtship and getting to know each other after. The lead proponent of the movement, Laodi Munafar, emphasizes this idea of marriage as a form of ibadah or worship, which guarantees one place in heaven. His vision to become the vanguard in the struggle to rid Indonesia of dating. Dating, according to Laodi, is dangerous. Dating culture corrupts young people, it wastes their time and resources, and it's dangerous for young people's self-respect. Pacaran itu merugikan, apalagi kalau dilihat dari segi akhirat. So it's all about the afterlife and getting into heaven, and you don't want to mess up your chances there. Laodi has published over 60 books, and here, I hope you can see him on the screen. He's reading one of his own books here on love and motivation, and he's a regular speaker trainer and runs his own publishing label called Gal Fresh. Okay, so what do we know about Taaruf? What do we know on a sort of a national level? Well, the Lembaga Survey Indonesia conducted in its 2019 survey found that Taaruf is an accepted practice across the broader Indonesian society. This survey included a question about Islam and dating in their national survey on intolerance that year. And across this national sample, 65.8% of the surveyed population said that Taaruf was the best way to find a mate. 7% said they strongly agree, 11.7% said they didn't have an opinion, and 10% disagreed. And the remainder didn't answer. And there is some alignment with the second question, which was asked if people should abstain from dating before marriage. 56.5% of people said yes, they did agree. 6.7% said strongly agree, and 11.4% said they didn't have an opinion, while 21% said they disagreed. That indicates that there is strong support for Taaruf and this anti-dating, but there is still almost a quarter of respondents who are not opposed to dating before marriage. So contextualizing Taaruf in the studies of, Indonesia studies, popular culture, the work that's been done on marriage, in particular by Ririn Otomo, who unfortunately can't be here today. She has found that in Jakarta, in her sample of 1,552 respondents, 4% said they were in arranged marriages. So as a practice, arranged marriage has decreased, and there's been, a growing increase of self-choice or autonomy in marriage selection. And there's other work, of course, that's been done on delayed marriage and its equation with rising educational status of women. I guess more work needs to be done on the extent to which Taaruf may perhaps be bucking the trend of delayed marriage. We don't know that yet. A key piece of work has been done by Dwi Putri and Otomo et al. On desired traits in spouses. Women still consider desirable traits in the choice of husband as pious, responsible, economically established. However, the most essential criteria for an ideal partner is a man who can negotiate between work roles, family, and the tradition in the context of late modernity. There has, of course, been a large body of work produced on rising public piety in the context of democratic transition, and a large body of work on the context of Islamic fashion popular culture. On Taaruf itself, people have written about it mainly as a collision between pacaran and Taaruf. It's been written about for its commodification. It's been talked about as a demographic jihad, and it's also been talked about in the context of critical subject positions or paradoxical positioning, seeing women as entrepreneurial subjects and making themselves into marketable brides. So that's how it's sort of been traced to the literature. But I'm going to just dive in here now and walk you through, I guess, what is Taaruf and how does it actually work? So Taaruf online is essentially a replication of Islamic courtship processes, but with modern adaptations, such as an exchange of profiles, which are called CVs, as in curriculum vitae, and technological mediation. So there are many Taaruf agencies that are active online, and they all seem to have different rules, which are quite fluid and that cater to various segments of the Islamic market. This usually means that some Taaruf sites may cater to NU followers who are considered more liberal. For example, female applicants can show their photo online, to the more pious sites with Taaruf applicants that follow the same Salafi preachers, for example. So some Taaruf sites make a point of saying that they ensure that they are Shari, meaning that Islamic values are upheld at every stage of the Taaruf process. And this seems to be a marketing tool that many of them use as well. So you begin by submitting a profile or your CV. And the CV format is determined by the Taaruf agency or the platform and covers a range of questions about personal details, occupation, marriage status, hobbies, physical features, religiosity, how many times you pray, how many juz you can recite, who your favourite ustad is. Young people can differentiate here with the aliran, or they can identify the aliran through that self-identification of ustad. Your goals in marriage and when you want to get married, how long from now, so you can specify 3 months, 6 months, a year, and how many children you desire, your ideal partner, and your own strengths and weaknesses. So when you submit this CV, there are various packages that you can choose, and I'll go into these in a moment. The online CV uses a special code, so you get given this code, for example, Ikhwan Z31 Jakarta, and this contains a shortened version. So what people can see, gender, date of birth, physical characteristic, occupation, ethnicity, place of birth, and the name of your ustad, who you follow. The second stage is whether you are di Taaruf, which usually means someone expresses an interest in you. So at this point, some of the Taaruf sites will request you to complete a more detailed version of yourself and your marriage goals, the details of your parents, whether they support you through this process, and your respective mahram, or your chaperone, who you can nominate, your mother, father, brother, or whoever. The details are shared with this interested party, and if you agree, you are then facilitated into a WhatsApp group. So you shift platforms at that point, where you are put into a group with the intermediary who you don't know. This is the online service that's offered, and you can put your mahram in. Some of the Shari Taaruf sites request that one's mahram also be put in. And what's interesting is that both men and women across these sites appear to be active in sending Taaruf requests. So it's not just the males requesting, or men Taaruf Khan perhaps, or the women being di Taaruf, but it seems to be going both ways. Interviews with Taaruf Instagram administrators show that there are strict rules for the Taaruf participants to exercise restraint, maintain their beliefs, and focus on undergoing the Taaruf process. For example, some of the sites recommend that they start their first chat by reciting the Bismillah. There is a long list of rules for Taaruf in the WhatsApp groups. For example, no emoticons, Chat hours are restricted between 12 and 7 at night. You can enter the WhatsApp number of your mahram, whoever they are, mother, father, brother, uncle. They can come in. Chats that are carried out in groups or private chats are prohibited. Forbidden to post a photo of yourself on the WhatsApp number as well. And this group is all the time supervised by an admin or an intermediary. It's forbidden to exchange social media accounts before reaching the nador, which is the next phase of the Taaruf process. And a decision must be made within a week on whether to continue the nador or not. For example, if you do continue, then you need to agree on the date. And if not, then you need to give them a reason, or they request a reason. A lot of people don't give a reason, but they request a reason of why you're exiting the WhatsApp group and therefore finishing the process at that point. The next stage is the nador, and this refers to a face-to-face meeting accompanied by a mahram for each Taaruf participants. For most Taaruf sites, this is the first time that the Taaruf participants know what each other looks like. And many of the Shari Taaruf sites recommend that the meeting take place at the male's house. This is because if the meeting takes place at the female's house, the male may come with a friend. They may not necessarily bring a parent. So by holding it at the female's house, then you know, hitting two birds with one stone, because you're getting to meet the parents as well and the family. At this stage, if the female wears a full face veil, she's permitted to buka or open it. And at this stage, there are far less rules specified on the Taaruf sites, presumably because they can't really they can't really control the interaction at this point, because they're not there. If the couple decides to continue after the nador, the remaining steps can go quite quickly. They are kitbah, engagement, and then on to akad nikah, or the exchange of marriage vows. A Taaruf participant can withdraw from the process at any time, although the further along it is, that it gets a little bit harder. From the interviews that we conducted, there are many stories of male and female participants withdrawing from the process at either the WhatsApp group phase or after nador. And a survey of Taaruf participants showed that they had withdrawn from Taaruf process many times. Some participants saying that many times meant 10 to 20 times. In fact, they were withdrawing more than they were actually participating. So if a participant wants to withdraw, they need to notify the admin, and they should delete the WhatsApp group. So on to the sites themselves. So there is an absolute plethora of online Taaruf sites that have gained increasing online followerships in the past decade, but has really increased intensity in the last, I'd say, 5 years. The growth of online platforms have largely followed trends in social media, and so they started out as websites and have adapted as new platforms become popular. At the moment, Instagram, it's all about Instagram. It's many Taaruf platforms are only on Instagram now, but many others go across multiple sites. So I'm just going to talk about three of the about 14 that we followed. And these are some of the most popular. The first was taarufku.id. It has a large following of 265,000 participants. 265,000, yeah, participants. The site itself actually carries minimal information about the requirements that applicants must meet to participate and get an account up and running. The only specified requirement in capitals is only for those who are ready to marry in their bio. The registration fee for this account is not disclosed, and they call that an infah, or a sort of a religious contribution, and you find out how much it is later. After paying the registration fee, participants are asked to fill out a Google form. This site is primarily about the exchange of CVs and doesn't provide any mediator services or mentoring for Taaruf participants. The timeline of the account is filled with the participants' biodata, their own details, and the occasional sort of Taaruf motivational message. This Taaruf site doesn't allow participants to post their own facial feature profiles, and all profiles use a sort of an anime style image that you can see here in the first image here. So females have hijab and they're covering the face with a leaf. Meanwhile, the males are depicted in Islamic long white robes with a patterned shoulder cloth and tasbih bracelet, glasses and white turban, and his face visible. The distinction in the self-portrait representation between men and women is a reflection of the site's rules about being shari and not displaying the female aura, even if it is in anime style. Narrative content only appears very occasionally on this site. In one of the posts, the admin conveys the ideal character of a Muslim and male and female. The post conveys that the woman must look for an ideal man who is religious, that will pray together, is punctual to come home, go to the mosque, practice the sunnah, attend meetings, be pious, do not speak harshly, do not smoke, love their parents, and actively earn money. Meanwhile, women are portrayed as emotional, fussy, spoiled, full of flaws, and that they should apologise when they haven't been good mothers or wives. The main message being that they must obey their nature, their kodrat, especially the female participants. The second site, taarufislami.id, has 24,000 followers at the moment and focuses on data exchange services for Taaruf participants. It's a private account, so you need to follow them before you can read its contents. This account doesn't have any information on its institutional affiliations or the official administrator of the account. And there are a number of packages offered at registration. So you can pay 50,000 rupiah to submit your CV, and your CV will go out to 3 other partner Taaruf sites. If you pay 150,000, then you'll get posted to 7 other sites. There is minimal information about the rules in the Taaruf process, but there's a list of testimonies from previous successful participants. The content on this site is motivational, especially related to marriage, but it's quite satirical towards those who are single, calling them jomblo, mblo for short, and, you know, poor singles and this sort of narrative. So on to, hang on. Yep, gone. Don't know where that slide's gone. Sorry. There's a number of sites that sell marriage packages, so encouraging people to not hesitate to just get married because you can do it quite cheaply. One promo, and I don't know where my slide's gone. I love this one. This is my favorite. You know, you can do it quite cheaply. You can get married for as little as 700,000, provided that you potong ayam sendiri and you supply your own motorbike to go for a honeymoon at the beach. So there's a real range there in the prices of these sites and what they offer. The third site that was studied is Rumah Taaruf, which is a public Instagram account belonging to the Rumah Taaruf My Quran Institution, which provides Taaruf mediator services. And even NISA's study on Rumah Taaruf established that it was founded in 2014. So it's been around for quite a while. Unique to this site is its organisational structure, applicant requirements and Taaruf processes that are all described clearly on the site. It also manages a website and Twitter accounts. On the Taaruf My Quran site, it has a whole heap of articles, marriage laws, marriage books. You can consultasi syari. You can have a lot of consultations on there. Taaruf My Quran is open about its organisational structure. It has Allah as its pelindung or head of the entire organisational structure. It also mentions the name of the board directors, their respective positions and duties. And Rumah Taaruf My Quran is led by Isnan Sabtoso, the president of the My Quran community, assisted by husband and wife couples who are representative for its regional branches, but only mentions like Aziz and Dan Istri as the mediator for South Jakarta and so on. But they have 23 branches across Jabodetabek region, so they're quite active. Rumah Taaruf My Quran describes in detail the Taaruf process as I described earlier, and even provides medical and psychological testing for Taaruf participants that have been mediated. Rumah Taaruf My Quran tries to be transparent, and they publish data and all of the records that are there. And it's really one that we could find which publishes its success rate, which, let's be honest, isn't great. So this is a period between 2010 and 2021, so 11-year period. It states there have been 469 processes of Taaruf, and from this number, 105 have resulted in marriage. And it only provides the one reason that 103 participants didn't continue due to their family not agreeing to the spouse. And from what we heard, this is the most common reason. So I'll now, what do we know about the characteristics of these sites? So we analysed here 2 of the Instagram sites, taarufislami.id and taarufku.id, and we can see, we're able to get the information of who are the participants. So when we look across these 2 sites, there's almost double the amount of women participants compared to men. In terms of age, the average age is 26 for men and 25 for women, and women participant numbers decrease as age increases. In terms of education, Taaruf participants are well educated. The majority have undergraduate degrees, and this is followed by holding a high school diploma. In terms of their religiosity, this is really interesting. I don't know where occupation has gone. I don't know what's happening. There's occupation. So occupation, most of them they self-identify as private sector employees. And then it goes to second group is self-employed. So back to religiosity. This is the most interesting one for me. So within these 2 accounts, these participants have self-identified their own level of religiosity. So 71% of men and 62% of women identified as not being sholeh or not pious. The second largest group identifies as very not pious, impious, and only a minority claim to be pious or very pious. So more young people are identifying themselves as not pious than pious and have registered on these sites. And I think this is really interesting, and we can have a discussion about this, but I think it goes some way to suggest that these people are understanding that marriage is a really important path to their own religiosity. And I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on this. So through the machine learning, the study has produced an enormous amount of data on all aspects of this process and about people's characteristics, and we can understand so many things. But today I'm just going to focus on describing to you these characteristics about the desired partner. And so these are word clouds, and how you read them is the larger the word, the more frequent these words were mentioned by participants. And there's also word relationships. So when we look at men, the most common key word that they desired in their prospective spouse was menerima apa adanya. Translates to, an acceptance of the partner, acceptance for who they are, but also acceptance of material conditions of what they could provide. Taat agama, meaning devout, and taat swami, and devotion to one's husband, were related keywords. And this is particularly interesting given the low levels of self-identified piety that we saw in their own CVs before. A significant keyword in the men's target criteria is taat kodrat, devout believers in kodrat. In this word analysis, the word related to the nature of women, which strengthened the meaning of taat agami and taat swami. The male participants wanted their potential spouse to be devout to both their husband and to religion. It also, unsurprisingly, found chantik, but related words were chubby that appeared in English, and it was related to kulit kuning langsat, so fair skin. And this is, I think, important too, because in many of these sites, people haven't actually seen a photo of the other person. So they're, trying to describe themselves, possibly in the best light. A related word here was usia lebih muda, meaning a younger woman was more desired. And of note, lajang janda tidak masalah. So being a widow was not a problem. And this word, it was also related to janda tanpa anak. So there was a relationship between those words. A widow without children was specified. Other significant words included wilayah sama, pintar masak, tidak main sosmed, don't use sosmed, and tidak main TikTok. TikTok social media platform associated with a lack of modesty. For women, the keywords that appeared in the word clouds were also quite gendered. Women cited their desire for an ideal husband to be head of the household, to be the main breadwinner, to have permanent work, bertanggung jawab, kerjaan tetap, kerja keras. Related to these keywords were also ideas about women's roles. So istri tidak bekerja, wife doesn't work or stays at home. Tidak paksa, istri kerja, doesn't expect or force the wife to work. Related words to that set of words were lembut, being gentle, also menerima apa adanya, accepting fate, I suppose, and penyabar, to be patient. The less frequent words occurred were taat agama, devout, also rajin ibadah, seiman, so having the same creed, and siap menikah. The study also found that keywords as a preference for husbands were tidak rokok, not smoking, posture ideal. So having a nice body posture was related to tinggi, being tall. Tidak bertatu, no tattoos, haram. And target age, namely to be mature, to be older and live in the same area, and also to be Javanese. Dewasa, usia lebih tua, wilayah sama, suku Jawa. The analysis also found, related to marital status, which was really interesting, was tidak polygamy. Women were wanting a husband who did not practice polygamy. So moving on to the intermediaries. So there's a range of intermediaries and a range of sites who offer this process. So they don't just sit in the WhatsApp groups and monitor those conversations, but they also are involved in offering complementary services attached to these Taaruf processes. So most of these pre-marriage services focus on preparing young people for marriage, and there's a real wide array of services, and they're advertised online, they're advertised everywhere. And the classes vary in duration, in price, and in one's level of readiness. So one training that was observed was called Class Terang Taaruf. This was a 3-day event held in 2019, before COVID, thankfully, in South Jakarta. There were 32 participants, 27 women and just 5 men, and they were all in their 20s. So this class incorporated all manner of things. There was pseudoscience, there was pop psychology, there was business concepts, like it sort of kicked off with a workshop around producing a successful CV, and conducting FG days to identify and role play, identifying your ideal mate. So the organizer of this training described himself as a former entrepreneur. His nasi goreng business had gone bankrupt, and he had found his calling as a love coach in English. The material focused on self-improvement and testimonies from couples who had been through Taaruf. He explained his approach was not to force people to get married, but to help them realise that they were ready for marriage. The love coach told the group in his introduction about the fees and how he used the money to hire the coffee shop, do the catering, and that the next stage that he was going to offer would be 3 million. And this focused on preparation for post-wedding life and included how to manage, organise and manage household finances, the role of a wife when there were household problems, and sex education. The love coach's first lesson underscored the importance of knowing yourself. He kicked off with a news clip from SJTV that showed the high divorce numbers that were increasing from 15 to 20% in a period of 4 years. And it was his explicit mission to bring that divorce rate down. The Love Coaches class then took a pseudoscience turn where he described the different parts of the brain which controls our rational and emotional thought and sensibilities. He drew upon pop theories of personality types as sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric, melancholic as essential knowledge in finding the ideal mate. The Love Coach then took the group through a series of questions about defining happiness, love, and marriage. He introduced Freudian and Jung concepts such as the Oedipus and Electra complex and a process of identifying values, which are over on this slide, all in English. The Love Coach explained that love is an investment. Marriage should be treated as a business. Marriage is about two people coming into a neutral space and making rules together. The question is, when do you make the rules? The answer is, he said, during Taaruf. And whilst the Love Coach indicated that marriage is an open negotiation, his answers in the Q&A session reproduced common gendered stereotypes. For example, he was asked if it was appropriate for a wife to ask her husband to do the housework. The Love Coach responded, yes, this was okay, but if she wanted to get into heaven, then she should really take on full responsibility for the housework. When asked if it was okay for a female to marry a man who was less educated than her, he responded that this wasn't advisable, as it may make the male feel inferior, which is very unhealthy for a marriage. So women should be humble. He added, nevertheless, that women do need to be intelligent because who is going to teach the children? The female also needs to lead the religious teachings at home. The Love Coach relied on an ustad to lead the session on marriage jurisprudence. The focus of this session presented excerpts from the Quran about the necessity of marriage. It was emphasised again and again that marriage is a form of ibadah, worship. And most importantly, marriage will secure your place in heaven. And this was when they graduated, the Taman ke Surga was reinforced over and over again. And that was the importance of the training. So on to the case studies. I just wanted to bring it back to the focus on women and women voices. So in this short section, and I am going to be wrapping up soon, these are 3 short vignettes and really details the breadth of Taaruf experiences for women. There's not one experience, there's not one way to do Taaruf and experience Taaruf as a woman. So the first up is a lady called Wisdom, excellent name. She's now in her 30s and she described the economic opportunities that she explored through setting up her own Taaruf. The second is Giza, a 24-year-old woman who tried Taaruf, was refused and decided to go back to dating. The third vignette is from Dia, who felt like she was actually being stalked and the platform offered her little protection. So on to Wisdom. A woman in her 30s, she describes, down here. Wisdom, she grew up an active member of the Rohis religious community while studying at a state madrasa. Dating is taboo, of course, for the members of Rohis, and anybody caught dating would be punished. At university, however, Wisdom discovered her newfound freedom. She started dating a young man who was also a student. It was serious and she assumed they would get married. But Wisdom's experiment with dating, as she called it, did not turn out well. The guy was actually seeing somebody else. She was left heartbroken and she felt humiliated for falling for a courtship like that, she said. Wisdom then set out on a path to find a way to repair her heart. She was persuaded by her more pious friend to undertake hijrah. Her friend said it was just easy. You start with changing the clothes you wear and then you can join Islamic studies recitation sessions. Wisdom started following Hanan Ataki's sermons and study sessions every day via Instagram. After following preachers such as Felix Shao and Hanan Ataki, Wisdom continued her journey to find studies that she felt were right for her. She now prefers Salaf-style preachers such as Ustad Khalid Basalama. In a short period of time, Wisdom was fully committed to hijrah. She no longer wore pants and always wore a robe, she said, with her full-length hijab. In 2016, she said she was participating intensively in Taaruf pre-wedding seminars and sharing Islamic teaching online. She then entered a Taaruf process for her first time. It actually started offline. He was a co-worker, and then they moved it online, but it failed. And luckily for her, he actually moved workplaces. Wisdom didn't give up though, and she then set about registering across a number of platforms, including a Telegram group. She travelled to Bogor to attend sermons. She tried a platform she found through Google Play Store, which she said was the cheapest at 300,000. This platform required participants to upload daily activities, which were self-evidence of self-improvement, such as cooking, sweeping, and mopping. She said she would take photos and upload them, but her time pressures as a teacher meant she couldn't fulfill this requirement of uploading every day, and she ended up being disqualified from that site. She then registered on a site on Instagram, and at that time in 2017, she said there were around 10 Instagram sites, and some of them did require your photo to be uploaded with your profile, which she objected to. She ended up contacting the administrator and asked if she could use a cartoon face instead of her own, and she was allowed to do this. Through this process, she was successful, and within 6 months, which she said was actually a long time by Taaruf standards, she was married. And she said the only reason it took this long because her husband's family needed time to save for the travel to Jakarta for the wedding. It was around this time that Wisdom decided to set up her own Taaruf site on Instagram, taaruf.islami. Administering taaruf.islami is a full-time job. She supplements her income by tutoring maths on the side, and her site also hires out Islamic wedding attire and sells food and herbal medicine. The wedding rental is very successful, and Wisdom has been able to finance the education of her 2 younger siblings. The dress rental, which can cost up to 500,000, is very popular, especially around Eid al-Fitr, she said. Currently, Wisdom has a collection of around 20 wedding dresses, which are pretty much on the go all the time. She also works with a sister from home as a makeup artist to provide wedding preparation packages. For Wisdom then, Taaruf not only provided her with a path to self-realisation and marriage, but a successful business to assist her family. Now, Giza's experience of Taaruf is perhaps more reflective of women's experiences in that it failed, and it also started offline and then went online.
Sorry, Angie,
yes.
5 minutes if you can.
Okay,
Thank
okay.
you.
2 more stories. So Giza she's 24 at the moment. She lives in Jakarta. She decided to try Taaruf after learning about the sites and the process through her university friends. She was interested in boys, but said she would never date before marriage because it's just unacceptable to her. Her match actually started offline with a university lecturer, and he had previously failed through the Taaruf process, as how she described it. After registering with the platform, the two exchanged CVs and organised to meet at a cafe. She recalled that he was very straightforward. She was very impressed by his piety, which she said was displayed when he wouldn't shake her hand. When they went through the processes and ended up meeting, he gave her a list of activities of preparation that included the mosque she should attend, where to seek advice on household expenditure budgets. He asked her view on obligations of her having family. He asked her how she handled her emotions. Giza then had the opportunity to ask the mediator, who was present for this initial meeting, how she should, where she should go to receive mentoring about the process of marriage. They communicated via WhatsApp. She thought it was all going great, but all of a sudden, out of the blue, she received a message that he would not continue, and he did not receive any messages through his istikhara prayers. So it was off. The mentor tried to encourage Giza to try again, and this time with her husband's friend. But after reading his CV, she refused. She considered him not to have a strong vision for what marriage would be. And she is now returned to dating, and she said she wouldn't choose Taaruf again. Dia's story, just briefly, is a university student. She decided to try Taaruf because her friends were there, and she noticed that most of the women were not uploading their original photos. And she said that that's where she went wrong. She put up her photo, but after a while, the administrator announced that the administrator would not be sending out CVs with the photos on it. The administrator said that they were to put more effort into the Nazor, the first meeting, and that we shouldn't be judging on the photos because this is not what determines your level of harmony or whether you enter heaven or hell. Dia said the administrator used the WhatsApp group for advertising. She would sell skin cream, snacks, and she regularly promoted wedding planning packages, starting from 5 million to 100 million. Then one day she received a CV. She liked what she read. This guy Zul, his favourite ustads were Abdul Somad, Adi Hidayat. His target was to marry within the year, to have 3 children. His criteria for the wife was that she was beautiful, a pious wife, and she could read the Quran. She decided to go ahead, and they met face to face. He asked her to meet face to face, and he kept sending her messages. And she felt like she needed a diversion. She bought more time, saying that she needed to find someone to accompany her. She couldn't find a chaperone. And after that, he started following all of her social media accounts. She began to feel like she was being stalked. She tried to get out of this Taaruf with Zul. She explained to the administrator he was pursuing her too aggressively and she didn't share his ambition to rush things. And she felt like this was her fault, that she initially had uploaded her photo with her identity. And anyway, she ended up getting out of it, but it was a real process for her to get the administrator to end the WhatsApp group. So I've run out of time, but just I guess in conclusion, returning to Connell's gender relations approach of cathexis. So through going through and exploring this realm of intimacy, this realm of emotion, the social constructedness of emotion provides us with an entry point to understand the relationships between gender and power. Women's experiences of and interactions with Taaruf sites vary, and it is clear, as Sarah Mahmoud suggests, that young women's agency can be understood as a capacity to act and navigate the patriarchal norms that underpin these Taaruf platforms. From creating a profile, scanning male CVs for eligibility according to their own ideas about desirability, refusing a Taaruf invitation, posting an invitation for a man to Taaruf, deciding to return to dating or continuing with the Taaruf process. These are all expressions of agency, of women's agency. Women's expression of a desirable candidate is not just one who's the head of a household but works hard and does not practice polygamy, are all expressions of agency. Taaruf Online has been created in a particular time in Indonesia where forces of globalisation, media and religion create conditions where conservative social values coincide with particular pressures on households. Young people seeking Taaruf is a reflection and articulation of these wider social processes and cultural processes. They are seeking a particular type of household that uphold conservative social norms with men as the head of the household. However, as Wisdom's story tells us, this has also given rise to new sites of household-based entrepreneurship. Through better understanding how young women engage with these sites, we can see how Taaruf sites become a way to actualise their faith through consuming media, attending sermons and classes on the subjects. And in this way, marriage represents a key pathway to practice both gender and religion. Given that these sites actually have pretty low success rates, we probably end with more questions than we started with. Why are these sites failing? How does it relate to polygamy? How has COVID-19 impacted? These are all wider questions, and these are all that we will pursue. And I would love to hear your feedback and your relations. Okay, thank you. And I'll pass back to you, Acho.
Thank you so much, Angie. Very fascinating. So let me just straightly invite Ibu Katie Robinson to provide her reactions to your presentation. If you can unshare your screen, Angie. Thank you. Over to you, Buketi.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much, Pak Acho, and thank you, Angie, for that very, very interesting presentation. Good afternoon, everybody. And it's very nice to meet you here in this platform. But so I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to comment on this very interesting research, which gives us a window into an interesting aspect of activity online associated with conservative religious values in Indonesia. And I think, you know, we all know that the extraordinary affinity that Indonesians, middle-class Indonesians have for social media. But I think this study is very interesting because it goes beyond the more common focus on the political uses of social media by Indonesian Muslims, and it expands our understanding of social media use in the social and cultural worlds of young Muslims. And I think it's very interesting that this study shows us that we're not just talking about people who identify themselves as very pious, but people who, well, I suppose that's an interesting question to be explored more. Just what do people mean when they exercise their agency through going on these sites as Muslims, but at the same time, they're not seeing themselves as particularly pious. So these social media platforms offer safe ways of mate selection through dedicated and managed sites. And also they offer some degree of brokering. So these young people are acting on their own, but initially it's without the intergenerational influences that they would have like in a village community or back at home. And this is, I suppose, covered to a certain extent by the brokering functions of these sites. I was thinking about the love coach. I mean, I don't know about so much about the Electra and Oedipus complex, how useful that is, but, you know, that he's talking to them about budgeting and some of those kinds of supports that they would normally get through intergenerational relationships. But I think it's also interesting, and this fits with a lot of what we know about other social media sites that are promoting conservative religious values. They're also sites for business. So I think there's been an efflorescence of women who can, like the first or second case study, where they can, for example, they can establish a business online that enables them to perform a particular kind of piety, and also this kind of separation from the material world that Hijra implies. Well, not really the material world, because they're selling goods and services online. So because this is about seeking marriage partners online, I'm very interested in marriage. And now that I'm dealing with all my own archives, tidying up my office of many years, I realize issues around marriage have really fascinated me since I was an undergraduate student. And I've written a lot about marriage in the context of the Indonesian archipelago. And I think the thing that really strikes me is if we look across the archipelago, there's many different kinds of customs, practices, roles, and responsibilities that are associated with terms that can be glossed in English as marriage, or even in Indonesia could be talked about as perkawinan, or about different kinds of kawin. And anthropologists have struggled with a universal definition of marriage. But I think the one that I would endorse would read like this: that marriage refers to the forms of social relationships, the forms of social relations grouped under marriage are quintessentially about managing reproduction. And that means both biological reproduction, having children, but also social reproduction, reproducing the institutions of society. And as and Angie was referring to R.W. Connell's gender relations approach in the study, and Connell sees what she calls the reproductive arena as absolutely at the heart of the kinds of institutions and norms and practices that become organized in terms of what we call gender relations. So Connell says, the reproductive arena is not fixed. It can be reshaped by social processes. Indeed, it's constantly being reshaped. Also, Connell tells us that gender is the structure of social relations that centers on the reproductive arena, that is sexual reproduction, and the set of practices that bring reproductive distinctions between bodies into social processes. So this is the problem that, if you like, that human society is dealing with in these kinds of social institutions that we can term gender relations, and marriage, or the kinds of arrangements that we term marriage, which are to do with the orderly management of reproduction, is absolutely crucial to this. So marriage at its heart is about things like, you know, how do you make sure that children are regarded as legitimate members of the society that have, you know, the right social positioning, the rights to inheritance, and so forth. And so the kinds of social relationships we term marriage are critical to the reproduction of gender relations and gender differences across the Indonesian archipelago. But there are many variations in these customary practices, and they go to all of the ways that these broader sets of relationships are managed. So I think in many places, marriage is about linking families or other social units such as clans. And so, for example, in South Sulawesi, the Bugis term for marriage literally means to take each other, but it doesn't mean the man and the woman, it means the two families, you know, and there's often a preference for marrying people who are classificatory cousins because it's a way of bringing relationships closer or bringing relationships together. And in Eastern Indonesia, marriage is about reproducing those appropriate relationships between clans and what they call the flow of life, the blood, the peopling of the society with people who are in the right sorts of relationships and who have the right relationships to property as well as other people. There can be differences in communities across the archipelago about ideas of the ideal spouse. Are they a kinship relationship, a cousin, or are they somebody else? About arrangements for divorce, what happens to the children? So in patrilineal societies in the archipelago, the children might stay with the husband's family, but in other places they'll go with the mother. There are different practices in different cultures across the archipelago about monogamy versus polygamy and so on. But actually, I was thinking during the paper, this advice that you can have a very cheap wedding because you can potong ayam and you can hire a motorbike and go on a honeymoon to the beach on the motorbike, made me think about when I first did research in Sorowako in the 1970s, and in this very complicated place with a lot of migrants coming in and all sorts of assumptions about social relations being disrupted. There were a number of occasions where young girls became pregnant and were married very quickly. And people used to call those kawin pisang goreng, because instead of having the usual negotiation between the families over a sapi or a kerbau or lots of chickens or something, it was simply calling people together to witness the akad nikah and have a cup of tea and a pisang goreng. And it was not a really great kind of marriage to have. But anyway, that's just a thought I had when Angie was giving the paper. As Islam spread throughout the archipelago, marriage was a really important route of everyday conversion. So, you know, the major stories of conversion focus on the Islamic courts, but we know from what we see in everyday practice until today that, of course, a lot of individual migrants are men who go in search of work, in search of trade, etc. They'll go into an area, they'll get married. If the woman they marry is not already Muslim, they will request her to convert, and then often her family converts as well. And you can imagine marriage having this crucial role in spreading Islam throughout the archipelago. And so what happened? You can see the ways that ideas and practices relating to marriage merge with Islamic precepts. So, fundamental to Islamic marriage is the akad nikah, and this became grafted, if you like, onto other kinds of ritual enactment of the customary ceremonies. And I think in a lot of places, it centers around the idea of the duduk bersanding, that the new couple sits at a communal feast before the assembled members of the community. And this is how people know and understand that they are now married. But so even in terms of Muslim Indonesia, there are all sorts of different ways in which marriage occurs, and different kinds of practices about spouse selection, engagement, betrothal, the actual wedding, the relationships between the families that are formed. That's happened as Islam becomes grafted onto the cultures of the archipelago. And of course, the Unified Marriage Law of 1974 tried to introduce some kind of, I suppose, simplicity or standardization into this, a single set of rules. And I suppose most importantly around things like women's rights in marriage and divorce and practices of divorce, and also, of course, polygamy, which we can talk about a little bit more later. And I think it's interesting to think about how we all know that law doesn't change our behavior, but laws are really important as part of a general package of social and political changes that lead to changes in behavior. So I think it's interesting, I find it interesting anyway, to think about how important the marriage law has been in terms of changing customary practices or ideas about marriage. So, for example, the minimum age at marriage for girls, which I know is still it's become a matter of contention again, because many marriage activists in Indonesia would say that the minimum age in the 1974 law is still too young and does not harmonise with definitions of adulthood in other Indonesian law. But nonetheless, I've actually seen situations where the fact that village officials knew that a girl was underage did lead to some sort of intervention in a customary process of marriage. So you've got that whole overlay of legal regulation and so on going on as well, in terms of the ways that marriages are being contracted and enacted and lived within throughout the archipelago. Actually, I was very interested that only one of the sites that Angie mentioned seemed to use the term jodoh. So I thought this was very interesting. So what's happening to this idea of jodoh, which I've found to be very powerful in terms of people talking about mate selection and that kind of thing. Now, the stories of the young women and men in Angie's paper and the discussion of their demographic characteristics led me to imaginatively engage with their situation. And I was thinking, well, they're in their mid-20s. They're often working in the city or they're students. They're at that stage of life where people seek a marriage partner and establish a family. And of course, this has been a hot topic during COVID, like certainly in Australia, and I'm sure in Indonesia, with lots of young people saying, well, look, under conditions of lockdown, we're not living the kind of normal life, that we go out and we do the sorts of things that lead us into the next stage of our life, which is getting married and settling down. So I'm thinking about these young people in Angie's study, and we can probably, I think in our conversation, Angie was saying that the effect on these practices of the COVID lockdown is another thing that she's quite interested to follow up on. But I'm thinking about these young people possibly away from the familiar world of their family and community. How do they go about this? Because, of course, the other important thing about marriage is and this is certainly true in a lot of Indonesian places or a lot of communities in Indonesia, getting married is your transition to adulthood. You know, that it's, I mean, Linda Bennett's study, for example, where she talks about young marriage in Lombok, and it's really clear that for those young women, getting married is the only way they have of getting outside of their family home, establishing a social identity as an adult, and so on. And I think that's quite common. So I'm thinking about these young people, and the concerns about the risk of dating or pacaran are not confined to these pious communities or this pious discourse, but I think it's a common concern in the modern world. And I think we can see that the incredible success of online dating sites and social media as alternatives all over the world attest to this fear. For example, I did some research years ago on the mail order bride phenomena of Filipinas who were seeking partners overseas, and began in the era of snail mail with correspondence marriages, which is the mail order that rather pejorative tag comes from, but then very quickly shifted to online. And some of those women said, we like this online communication. It's slow. It's not like you go out to a bar or you go out somewhere and you meet somewhere and it's all quick, quick, quick. It's slow and you can get to know the person, and it's really easy to disengage, which I think some of the stories show, if you're not happy with the way things are going. And when I did research in Indonesia on high school students in the early 2000s, it was very interesting that many of these junior high school students talked about the threat of pergaulan bebas, pergaulan bebas. It's the most threatening thing. It's a great risk to young people, even though they themselves didn't engage in pergaulan bebas and didn't know anybody who did. So I think there's been a general, you know, there is this general anxiety around the idea of dating, which I think is reflected perhaps as part of the cultural background that makes these online sites attractive to people. Also, interestingly, in some research that I've done, it's not just dating sites where people meet online. I mean, which is any of you young people who are watching this webinar will know that online chat rooms and forums, you know, about different passions like rock music or photography or Beatles are really common ways for young people in the modern world, all over the world, to form relationships that then turn
sorry, Buketi, 3 minutes.
3 minutes, fabulous. So there's two matters that struck me of particular interest. Islam provides a shared framework for people from diverse social and cultural backgrounds in terms of seeking a spouse in the cosmopolitan modern world. Somewhere like Jakarta, for example, where people from all over Indonesia, from all different cultures are thrown together. And they've got all these different ideas and customs around, you know, finding a partner and marrying. But Islam gives this common frame. And I was thinking about Tony Reid's comments about the spread of Islam through the port cities in early modern Indonesia, and about Islam providing a common language or a common set of ethics for trade relations to happen between diverse people. So in a similar way, Islam can frame a shared set of expectations, ethics and norms for young people seeking spouses from different suku bangsa to their own. And I think the word clouds reflect a little bit of that. Given that marriage is about household formation and social and biological reproduction, in my experience in village Indonesia, it's commonly assumed when arranged marriages were still fairly common, it was assumed by parents and their children that in contracting arranged marriages, the parents and the relatives have the children's best interests at heart. And so, for example, they're interested in forging economic units. And so, for example, in the mining town, there was first of all a resistance to people accepting proposals from men who worked in offices because they said, tidak tahu kerja. They didn't know how to work. They weren't farmers. They couldn't go out in the fields. And similarly, when marriages broke down, I saw parents, the fathers of the husbands, feel that it was their obligation to look after the wife and the children because they were the ones that had got her into it. And people said that, you know, if we get divorced, they set it up, they got to fix it, they got to look after us. So, but I was very interested to see that the qualities listed as ideal in a spouse were not really all that much different from the kinds of qualities that parents would have been looking for in arranging the marriages of their children, of their nieces and nephews, and so on. Yeah, and the only thing that was different was this cultural desire that would come through in the parents' choices to cement kinship and other kinds of cultural connections like clan relations in Eastern Indonesia or something like that. So I think it would be very interesting to follow through questions of, and there were a few hints of it in the paper, about where does the role of the families come in? Like there was that mention in the one case study of the relationships breaking down, negotiations breaking down because the families didn't approve. And also when the marriages are actually, when the akad nikah actually happens, what happens then? You know, are there still customary celebrations and other parents involved? Or is this something which is another commodity that's purchased off the site? Just a final comment, which is just a little thing that I remember from many years ago, the comment about kulit kuning langsat. There's a lovely article in Feith and Castle's Indonesian Political Thinking, which is a speech to the parliament from a Javanese representative in the 1950s. And he talks about how the most beautiful woman, I can't remember the context, but the most beautiful woman, the perfect skin, is that of the Javanese because it's kulit kuning langsat. So it's clearly an old ideal. So anyway, thank you very much for an interesting paper.
Thank you, Ibu Kathy. Very good comment. We're running out of time, but let's have one round of questions. I see there are a couple of questions written and a couple of hands raised. So let me try to combine some questions from the Q&A box. And there are questions from Dia, Ayu Kartika, and Dewi Sri Tompul. The first question from Dia is about the psychological testing or profiling, Angie. So she wanted to know what exactly the testing was about. And both Dia and Dewi were asking about the survey response in terms of the being pious, right? How did you actually solicit those responses? Because there is a concern from Dewi about, you know, in Islam, you're not supposed, as Muslim, you're not supposed to tell people that you are pious. So maybe that distort your survey, or maybe you use some questions to indirectly gauge about the level of piety. So those are the two questions written. And before going back to you, so you can also respond to Ibu Katie later, let me invite Yusak Setiawan and Rofani to ask their questions directly. I'll start with Yusak first. Yusak, are you there? You're unmute. Or maybe we'll start with Rofani. Rofani? No? Maybe we'll come back to them later. So if you can respond to some of these questions now, Angie, go ahead, from Dia and Dewi, and also maybe if you have some comments back to Ibu Katie, over to you.
Sure. Yeah, no, firstly, thank you to Kathy. I think it's wonderful to hear, that this tiny little contribution, sits within this wider, decades upon decades focus on Indonesian marriage and, at times, various times of, and what all these things mean, globalization of Islam, currents of Islam. So it was a wonderful to put it into perspective, I guess. So thank you, Kathy. And I think that's maybe one of the points, that maybe the platforms have changed, the ways that people are getting a spouse maybe have been mediated through these new technologies, but maybe some things just haven't changed in terms of, you know, what people are looking for, you know, in some of the word clouds around, you know, wanting the household unit, wanting it to be a unit, wanting their partners, you know, to be kerja keras, wanting all of these things. I don't think have really changed all that much over time, despite, you know, the various currents, I guess, of Islam. When we actually ask women, and that I think is the benefit for doing anthropological research and for doing offline research, was one of the other questions. When you actually ask people, you can see that, you know, where things change and where things stay the same. I think just briefly on the role of the parents and the role of the families, I think that's one of the things that hasn't changed from the research that was done in this study. The choice, people and women in particular described that they liked this process because it gave them that choice, that it wasn't being dictated by their parents. I mean, there are also a lot of fails where parents have not agreed. So parents are still playing a really strong role in this progression into this transition to adulthood through marriage, as you say. And as for the actual acara, wedding events, some can be packages, and they're certainly selling those wedding packages, but it's no different from you know, the parents are still involved, the whole family is still involved. It's not something separate. It may just be more expensive by going through one of these platforms. I mean, there's so many things we could go into, but just on those questions, thank you for all of the questions, and thank you for the interest. It's wonderful to see that people are interested in this topic. So thank you. The first one on it was the psychological profiling. I think that gets back to those personality tests. So that kind of pop psychology was in one of my slides around where they sit on those sorts of how actually true they are is questionable in science, but some of them use that, and some of them make up their own on the sorts of how prepared that person is for marriage. In terms of that other question about religiosity, I think that's a really good question, and that we took directly from the questions that were on the categories. So these people, they're not from me. We didn't make these categories up. They ticked things such as self-identifying. How many times did they pray? 5 times a day. You know, all of the classic things. There wasn't really anything outside of that. How many juz they could recite, put a number in. So it goes to those daily practices. Who, if they followed preachers online, I'm trying to bring up but it was those sorts of things to do with the daily practices of actually practicing Islam. What was the other question? There was one. Oh, there was a good one just earlier on online and offline methods. I think we were interested in coming to this because it was an online phenomenon. People were sending me all of these fantastic screenshots. I knew people who were participating, who had dropped out. It seemed to be this flourishing of online activity. So I think we came to it as an online phenomena, but it is clearly an offline phenomenon. I think scholars of social media, Martin Slama and Barendrecht, argue that within the context of Muslim piety in Southeast Asia, there's a novel constellation of interfaces, that it is an online and offline mix of relationships facilitated by media. I think it's no longer useful to even, you know, to pull them apart. The online and offline create a new platform and a new arena of engagement. And so I looked at it through that perspective as an anthropologist, looking at the online stuff as a cultural product, which in and of itself, you know, it interrelates with offline all the time in real life, IRL, IRL banget. Okay, so what was the other question? Did I not answer?
I think we can check again if Rohani is ready to ask her question directly. Rohani, are you there? No. Okay, so let's go back to the Q&A box. So just to clarify again, Angie, so you have those charts about sangat tidak taat, not pious at all, and then a bit pious. So I think that relates to Dewi and Dia's question. They're concerned that maybe to some Muslims, they will choose to identify as being pious, but actually, or not pious, because they know that self-declare yourself as being pious is not recommended, it's not good in Islam.
Yes,
view.
yes.
So
yeah, no, that's a really good point. And that's something, you know, this, and I think we can just say, this is how they self-described and take it in and of as that. It doesn't necessarily mean anything else, but this is how they self-identified. And it brought up some other things here. It was, you know, to do with the daily practices. So, and yes and no sorts of questions. So, you know, what kind of hijab you wear, is it, you know, is it the long gamis style, you know, and so people could self-identify through the everydayness, which tells us something. I don't think it can tell us everything. And I don't think we can, you know, do associations between, you know, level of self-declared piety with anything else, really, without talking to people and what they mean when they speak in this way.
okay. So let's take the last question from the Q&A box. That is from Luli Prastuti. Do the online Taaruf participants know the legality of the mediators in online Taaruf? Is it because it is sort of difficult to ensure the people behind it? And is it real wise and pious mediator that is usually done by ustaz or ustaza to be the mediators?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And I think I was rushing through my last story, but I couldn't get to it. But Dia told us, you know, at the end, when she had all that trouble of getting off and feeling like she was being stalked, she said, and I'll just bring up her quote because I think it really sums up the difficulty for this huge plethora of sites, and people just don't know who are behind it, unless like, you know, like Taaruf, Rumah Taaruf, you know, they're quite transparent around their processes and around who's behind them. But I would say most of them aren't, you know, like they're just like the love coach, you know, he failed in his nasi goreng business. So then he just thought, you know what, I'm just going to give this Taaruf thing a crack. I mean, he just, you know, he doesn't really have any qualifications for this. And I think, sorry, I'm just going to find where she was saying, can't find it. She was basically saying, you know, she kept writing to the administrator and going, this is my experience, you know, I want to get out of this. And basically they paid her no attention. And she felt like, and there's a quote, which I cannot find, where she says, I felt like they were just after my money. You know, they were only interested in taking my money each month. It was a monthly monthly payment, the one she was on, and they weren't interested in actually, you know, providing any of that sort of care that is offered on other sites. So I think that's a really good question, and I think it's probably one of the things that these sites need to be thinking about, and one of the questions that I'm quite concerned about is how these sites can provide better protection for women as well that are on these sites to stop these things kind of happening. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. I think our time is up. Thank also for to our participants. I see more than 50 participants we had today, and of course, thank you so much, Buketi, for your discussion comments to Angie's seminar, and I'll return this to Nuke, who might have some announcement for our audience. Over to you, Nuke.
Thank you. Just next week's seminar would be another one for gender insights from the COVID-19 digital merchant. This is with Maria Monica Wiharja and Putu Sanji Wibisana from the World Bank. With that, I will close this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Angie, Buketi.
Thank you so much, Kathy, Ibu Kathy. Thanks, Acho.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.